I need a 14.4% diet. This is a slide that if you get a feed analysis and you know roughly how much you're feeding, you can figure on your own, or Tammy can, and you know that you need a 14% protein diet. The 12% diet won't cut it. Now, what happens if you give a 12% protein diet? You just don't get the 2 pounds a day gain. They'll gain less. They're 2.2. Okay. So, now, I've got this animal's 990 pounds. It's still a medium frame steer, gaining still 2.2, eating 2% of its body weight. By these same calculations, going through the same weight, it would only need 9.5% crude protein. Let me ask you a question. Why don't we feed 9.5% protein diets? What is the level here that you wouldn't be satisfied with if you buy good genetics? You'd want this calf gaining 3.5 pounds a day, not 2. And that's why we feed 12 to 14, because our genetics can do better than this. And that is a reality. Okay. Okay. Finally, are there differences in byproduct feeds for background of cattle fed forages? So, suppose you can get soy hulls, corn gluten feed, or distiller's grains. I want to just say one thing right now. Distiller's grains, around 32-33% protein. Corn gluten feed, around 23%. Soy hulls, around 11 to 13% protein. Soy hulls are not a protein supplement. That's what I want you to understand. Soy hulls are the outer covering of a soybean meal. They're like 88% cellulose, 88 to 89% cellulose. There's no lignin. They're just a really highly digestible fiber. That's all they are. Okay, and that's important because the most common question that I get with people who are looking at protein supplementations, probably 30% of people give me soy hulls, and they don't understand the difference between soybean meal and soy hulls, and it's very common. Okay. So we did a study looking at this, and I'm sorry, when you go back, you were ahead of me. I just called out, assuming you weren't paying attention.
I'm taking notes.
On that thing?
Yeah.
You're good. You're good. I can't even see the phone when it's that small. So, you've got stocker cattle. You can get these 3 things. Soy hulls are lower in protein and energy, but they're widely used as basically cellulose. Corn gluten feed provides rumen ammonia for the bacteria. It's 80% rumen available. Distiller's grains have 2/3 of their protein as rumen bypass protein, but they are the highest in energy. Now, I'm going to say one thing. Distiller's grains are very, very variable in energy. And we use 45% of our corn crop in the United States for ethanol. So don't assume that you're not going to be able to get distiller's grains down here forever, because we are running out of places to feed them. Question back there? Comment? We have hit our capacity in our ability to feed distiller's grains in the Midwest, in many counties, because we have nitrogen and phosphorus regulation, and distiller's grains are also 0.7, 0.8% phosphorus. And we have places that are trying to cheapen their diets and have been for 10 years. And they are not able to meet their nutrient management plans because states like Ohio and Indiana and Illinois have phosphorus regulation. And if you can't meet your nutrient management plans, there are penalties for not meeting those. And so the reality of it is they will become more available over time. Okay, we just did a study where we took different groups of heifers. We fed them up 1% of body weight with round bale hay, and then we supplemented. And the bottom line is, I just want to show you that when we supplemented with the soy hulls, they didn't gain nearly as well as true protein supplements. I just showed this to say, don't make that mistake. Soy hulls are an energy supplement, they're not a protein supplement. Any questions before we switch? Yes?
Peanut hulls fall into that same category?
Peanut hulls are the exact same thing. Peanut hulls are even worse than soy hulls. They are high lignin. Now, I can grind peanut hulls, and I can put them in a high-grain diet, and I only need to have about 5% of them in the diet, and that's the same thing as having 15% hay in there, which gives me a lot more room for grain.
So the peanut hulls are just fine.
They are just fiber. Chew a peanut hull. Yeah, you'll chew it for a long time. So will a steer. And it's got enough lignin in it that it's going to come out looking like a little crushed up peanut hull. It's the first cousin to sawdust.
Kind of going back a little bit, you started off with showing the difference between medium frame and large frame.
Yep.
And you stayed with the medium.
Yep.
But it almost sounds like, okay, we're going to have to really increase our protein and increase large frame.
Absolutely.
So in today's
So what's it?
everything, it sounds like you need to be shooting more towards medium frame.
Well, that kind of depends on where you're at. You know, and let me explain this. 20% of the cattle fed in the United States are dairy cattle and dairy crosses. And if you watch Angus sales over the last 4 to 5 years, many of the top genetics coming out of sales are going into large groups in the dairy industry that are breeding their own. When you breed those Angus cattle to those Holstein and Holstein crosses, they're still large frame. They're the same frame that Senthal cattle are. They're even a little bit bigger now. And so the reality of it is, we have a lot of large frame cattle out here. If you're feeding yearlings that have been grown slow and haven't put on, a lot of them are large frame. And so it becomes even more important. The thing that you have to keep in mind when you feed large frame cattle, as you feed more protein, if you just don't want to create giants and you want them actually in muscle, you have to hit them with a lot more energy than you do a medium frame animal. That's why a lot of these Holsteins finish at 1,600 pounds. They're big frame. You give them energy, they're going to put on their frame growth still, and you have to hit them with energy, just from a feeding standpoint. The good thing about those crosses, those Holstein crosses, they're not as efficient as Angus crosses, but boy, are they predictable. They are very predictable. And I'm going to ask you a philosophical question. I like doing this in a cow-calf ring. Why do we have feedlots? Why are there large-scale commercial feedlots in the United States? What is the purpose of a feedlot? Yes?
This is like specialization.
Specialization, but what's the economic goal? The economic goal of feedlots is to market grain at value added. Cattle are only the way we're doing it. Now, we pay a lot of attention to genetics, management, marbling. Yes, they're all part of the system. But when you get right down to it, feedlots are there to market grain. and grain byproducts. And that's why the most important thing in a feedlot is feed efficiency. It is more important than average daily gain. They run hand in hand because efficiency is just a calculation. It's pounds of gain per pounds of feed. So we talk in terms of feed to gain, but output over input is efficiency. And the reality of it is, I'll talk more about this next fall and I'll talk more about this next week. But the reality of it is that in the United States right now, in commercial feedlots, our average feed efficiency is between 6.2 pounds of feed to 6.3 pounds of feed per pound a day. Now, I can break that down and promise you that if you've got a steer stuffer and a round bale, you're going to be in the mid to high 8s. And that's why feedlots don't have steer stuffers. Because it's not about saving labor. It is about getting the greatest feed efficiency. Because if I'm buying corn at $6.35 a bushel, and I can choose to feed 6 pounds of it or 8 pounds of it, put on that pound of gain, I'm going with 6. And down here, if I'm paying $9 plus per bushel of corn, it's even more important. So the reality of it is, a lot of people ask me, can we feed cattle in Georgia? Absolutely. The weather's not the issue. It is a bothersome thing, but the reality of it is understanding how to get the most efficient cattle, because we are at a disadvantage. Our basis for corn is so far off what the average industry is that we have to really pay attention to efficiency. It's the number one thing that I concern myself with. All the other things, the management, the feed month management, the animal health, the animal welfare, it all goes back to efficiency. They're nice things to do, but they all impact efficiency.
Do other parts of the country struggle with aflatoxin?
Yep,
Okay, like we do down here?
yep. Yep. Ohio, so I never feed oats. I'm from Ohio. I will not formulate a cattle diet with oats, because the area of the world that I'm from, Kentucky and Ohio, have highest level of aflatoxins in oats. And it is because when they are harvested, it is always humid and always hot, and we get high levels of aflatoxins. And we can't afford to feed oats because the horse people feed all the Canadian oats. So probably with farmer feeders in Ohio, 60% of the wrecks that I've seen with people that have had small herds, 20, 30 head, feeding their own calves, that just have horrible times feeding is because they're feeding their own oats to their cattle. And they could feed them at 3 to 4%, not get a problem. But what happens with aflatoxins with cattle?
Will they build up?
Yeah, but what cattle do? Before anything drastic happens, the number one thing, and we'll talk about this next fall, we may talk about this next week, I may throw another curveball at you. Because goodness knows I can't follow my own schedule.
They decrease.
The reality of it is, cattle go off feed. And so you know you've gotten a load in if you're feeding large groups of cattle. And by large groups, I mean anything over 100, really. If you get a load of something in and you're feeding a byproduct and you get a decrease in feed intake for the first 2 days after you switch, but you haven't done a diet switch, you better get an aflatoxin test done, because the first thing cattle do is they go off feed. And the thing is, when we are heating things like distillers, grains, corn gluten feed, cottonseed, anything. We are not heating it hot enough to destroy the aflatoxins. All we're doing is concentrating them. So it becomes a huge thing because you have limits of 5 parts per billion in the dairy industry. So beef cattle are like 300. And the reality of it, because it's passed in the milk to infants and we can't have that. So the reality of it is the beef industry gets a lot of the stuff that is really on the border. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wrote down some questions. Is Helicobacter...
Hey, I'm here, it's okay.
Great.
Good time to do it.
Is Helicobacter pylorus responsible for ulcers in cattle as it is in humans?
I have no idea.
Okay.
That was easy.
And like in freezing temperatures, what's the ideal water temperature for cattle?
50.
50 degrees.
50 to 55. When you get, they don't like heat. They don't like warm water. Okay, you can actually back them off when you get into that 70 range. So 50 to 55 is a nice temperature. What's the temperature of the soil? You know, go down a couple feet, it's around 55. It's a nice neutral. And it follows their thermoneutral zone. The thermoneutral zone for cattle, which I will talk about maybe next fall, just, I know everyone's excited about the thermoneutral zone. It's that area where feed intake is higher than maintenance requirements. And it's basically 59 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what it is in Celsius for those of you who are just dying to know. But Google can tell you. But within that realm. Yes?
So last week you were discussing about cattle going into the feedlot. And you said that they're not sexed, so that the males and females, and you don't have that problem. And now you're also talking about how the medium frame and the large frame calves need different protein amounts to grow properly.
Mm-hmm.
So is that how they're separated? Or they came in on this truck and they go in that pen?
I'll show you a couple pictures that were taken 20 years ago of the technologies that are used in feedlots. Have you heard of High Plains feedlot? High Plains feedlot's a really big feedlot. 20 years ago, they had a camera and they had a big whiteboard. And as the cattle came up the alleyway, their camera took a picture and put a frame score on those cattle, a height length measurement. And then they went in to the chute where they got vaccinated and weighed. And when they came out, they were computer controlled so that they came out into 12 different pens. And so those controls were electronically controlled. So the minute that they were weighed and they were released, it was an automatic gate system to open to take them to that pen. Now, in my opinion, really, really good feedlots separate by sex as well, because there are differences. The problem is that we still have a lot of 3,000 to 5,000 head feedlots in the United States that don't have the pen, or they're basically large farmer feeders is what they are. And a lot of those don't separate by sex. They should. They should. But it depends on how quickly they receive cattle. Because the worst thing that these feedlots can do is once you've got cattle in for 2 weeks, you have a 5-day window, basically, to fill pen. So if you're coming down here for a sale, and then you're going to Dublin, Virginia for a sale, and they're 3 days apart, you can mingle them. But if you got a sale next week, those cattle that came in with that 3 to 4 day period or 2 to 3 day period that you've put in pens, you've already made those pens. And now when you bring in other calves, you're at a different stage of feedlot management. you're at a different diet stage, you're at a different stage of the psychology of the calf, the dominance. You don't want to bring in a bunch of naive calves that have to establish dominance now with a bunch of calves that know how to eat out of the feed line. Yes?
So, I'm trying to understand all this, but I'm barely.
So am I, and I've been doing this a long time. It's okay.
So if there's so say you have a feed, and I put some numbers down, it's 30% corn, 30% corn gluten, and 40% peanut oils. Well, I'm kind of getting the feeling that that's really not gonna do much. The corn gluten's gonna help.
Yeah, the corn gluten's gonna help, the corn's gonna give you energy, the 40% peanut hulls ought to be dropped down to about 5%.
Because that's
You have
just right.
35% more room for protein and energy.
Yeah, that should only be 5%.
And if you were in the Midwest, you would give me those same percentages as a farmer feeder, only you would replace the peanut hulls with soy hulls. It's just what's, you know, and it's the same thing.
And so the biggest thing I think I've taken away from this is you have a totally, you don't have a generic one-size-fit-all feed
No.
at all.
There is never a perfect feed.
So if you're feeding this to your cows that are lactating or pregnant, because that's going to be one herd, then you're going to have another herd that's going to be your weaned, calves. How would you adjust this basic formula for those two different groups?
Well, if I had cows that were going to be lactating, depending on where they were in their stage of gestation, I wouldn't have either peanut hulls or corn in the diet. I don't want the corn in the diet because I don't want the starch, because I don't want to select a lower birth weight bull and increase my birth weight 6 to 7 pounds. I don't want to create a calf that won't marble to its genetic potential because of fetal programming where I've given it too much glucose as a fetus. And I'm going to just say this, and remember this out of these entire schools. Corn is for feedlots, forage is for cows.
So those
Optimize and maximize forage digestibility for cow herds and stocker cattle. And, I have to say one thing. Now I'll get back to you, I promise. Eventually. Not sure what time. Is everyone enjoying tonight or not?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I got like 3 hours sleep last night. I was really sick, so I am pumped up. When you get me in the car, I'm going to be 3 miles down the road and crash. But this is fun to me. Okay. Forages for cows and calves. Now, here's what I was going to say is, I come from a part of the world where land is pretty expensive, just like it is down here. We have a lot of cow-calf producers that are trying to run cows on $20,000 an acre ground. And the only way you do that is you let the cows do the work. You don't have machines do the work. So what that means is you spend more time with your cows. You run a hot wire around these big areas, and you take a portable water trough that's hooked up to a black plastic hose that's on wheels, and you move the fence every day to every 3 days, and you do a circle. You revert back and forth so that your growth up there, we're shooting for 21 to 24 days plant growth before we go back in. And the reality of it is, the thing that absolutely shocked me coming to Georgia is huge areas where the pastures just look grazed down to nothing. And if you would just think about in these huge things, like they do out west in some of these big pastures, just a pie shape with water development area in the center so that you can rotate cattle around, you'll get about 50% more pounds of beef per acre by doing that, by not having the forages all we've grazed down so far that the forage is hurt and that the cattle are having to go and search. You know, realistically, if cattle can go in and graze something like this and it's got a lot of water in them, you're going to make out great because that has so much more protein and so much more mineral than that stuff when it's this high and it's brown. And you've missed it. It's just a reality. I think in some parts of the world, New Zealand dairy people have quite frankly taught a lot of beef producers how to manage forage. They're forage managers. And we tend to really go against the current. I'm including myself in this. This is not anything that, I mean, I grew up in strip mine ground and we used to run 7,000 acres for stock for cattle and stuff. And the pastures were 400 acres apiece. You know, so I'm not trying to talk down on anyone. I'm just saying, with the current economics, if we look at production per land area, then we ought to be growing grass for these cows and these stockers. And at that point in time, you're not talking about a 500-pound wean calf or a 450-pound wean calf. You're talking about a 550 or 600 pound. Because the reality of it is, our lactation curves, we have EPDs for milk. We can do this. And yes, you can get too much milk. But my gosh, we can burn off milk so fast with bad forage, it's not even funny. And then if you don't creep feed, then that calf doesn't have enough nutrients anywhere. We have so many opportunities in this industry to improve on individual farms, it's not even funny. And I will say this, it doesn't cost a lot with the technologies for solar powered fencing systems. You don't need electricity out there. I mean, you can buy solar towers that'll knock you on your butt a mile and a half away. And that will make you think twice. You know, you'll think that devils come up and grab you if you touch it. But the reality of it is, one hot wire and one strand of colored wire or wire with flags. Once cattle know how to do it, yeah, the first couple days, they can be quite frustrating. But the reality of it is, after they learn what a hot wire is and that their feed's better, they'll be waiting on you to move. David,
I have one last question.
okay. You're still back there. I forgot. Hello.
Because I wanted to ask this earlier when we were talking about the length of the forage, you know, taking the hay and
Yeah.
chopping. So if you don't have anything to chop it, what do? Just unroll it, run over it with a lawnmower?
No. Yeah, you realistically have to buy a chop cut baler. That is the reality. The chop cut baler is the way to do it.
But
You
then
can't
how
run
do you
over-
feed it?
Huh?
But then how do you feed it?
Oh, well, they come apart.
No, but I'm saying you'd have to put it in a bunk, you can't put it in hay rain.
Oh, yeah, you can.
So then you have to completely change the way you feed.
I don't know. I've been pretty successful with people who are using it. We haven't completely changed the way we feed. The one thing that you will see when you stick those in, yeah, you have to, you know, neck wrap is an interesting thing. You got to get that off for those chopped up balers. But the reality of it is, when you open a bale and you put a hay ring around, but what you don't have is, you don't have them pulling out and dropping hay. When they pull out a mouthful. We actually put in some concrete pads a few years before I came down here, and we did research with long stemmed hay versus chop cut hay. And we had 30% less waste. Cutting it, the same field, the same time, the only difference in the hay was that we did half the field with our older baler, and we did half the field with a chop cut baler. And when they pull it out, It doesn't pull a bunch of stuff out that's a foot long and falls outside the ring.
If you're using a mower conditioner and it's either got a knife cut, I mean, it's not cutting it all the way through, but it's cutting the stem,
Yeah.
or it's trimming the stem, is that gonna help?
Yes, it helps. It's not the same thing, but it helps. It helps the digestibility because it creates more surface area immediately. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the maximum surface area for digestion for those forage digesting bacteria. So yeah, there's a lot of data that helps. So I would argue this, if you have 100 cows, you need to look at a bale chopper or a chop that baler. It's an either or. Because, how long do we keep them?
As long as
As
they'll.
long as they will last. That's right. So the thing is, if you're going to do something that you're going to have to suffer with for the next 20 years, when you price out the differences in cost versus just using a realistic savings of 20%, the value I use is 35 for me, but 20% is very realistic. I think it's like talked about earlier. If you get more highly digestible feed into them sooner and they're able to eat more highly digestible feed every day, you get more Rumen microbial protein production. So your actual requirement for protein supplementation goes down. It might only go down 1 or 2%, but 1 or 2% of purchased protein over the course of multiple years is huge. Do you want to take a break?
Take a break.
Tom?
Oh, you're asking Tammy.
Y'all need a break? 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I need. Yeah. I'm here.
I think you don't want to work with.
Well,